Hi, I'm John Hudson from the Dark Lady Players, and we believe that the plays of William Shakespeare were actually written by a black Jewish woman called Amelia Bassano Lanier. This is a very revolutionary theory, but it's beginning to make sense. She was, after all, England's first published woman poet. She wrote a book in 1611 called Salve Deus, and she was also mistress to the man in charge of the English theatre. What's more, we've found her signatures on 7 of the plays. This is real. Mr. Shakespeare did not come to London until probably 1592. That was when he first arrived. And it is inconceivable to me that somebody coming from Stratford who would have had a Warwickshire accent, who would have had no way of having learnt Italian or Hebrew, would have had no way of developing intense musical skills, because none of his relatives were musicians, and none of his community, as far as we know, were professional musicians. There's no way that within like 12 months he could suddenly drop his Warwickshire accent, start writing standard English that was intensely musical, making lots of Hebrew and Italian puns, and referring to hundreds of literary works which he probably have had no reason to read in Stratford. So there is just no social context that makes any sense. In 1622, the quarto of Othello was published, which has 163 lines missing from it, which were then added in between 1622 and 1623, when the first folio is created. And these 163 lines expand the part of the character Amelia, and they also create the Willow Song, and Amelia is asked to repeat the Willow Song. What doth thy song-bowed lady, willow? I will die to music, willow, 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 willow. Now, this combination of an Amelia and a willow, 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 dying like a swan to music, is part of a broader pattern that exists right across all the Shakespearean plays, which I call the swan signatures. And in order to understand them, you need to know that the dying swan to music, which comes from Ovid, is the standard image of the Renaissance poet, the great poet. And there are 2 other places where it appears. Firstly, in King John, where the person who's saying it is Henry, who is John's son. And the other place it appears is in Merchant of Venice, where the person it's referring to is Bassanio, who is going to die like a swan in Portia's tears. And this is no coincidence, because these names, Amelia, Johnson, Willow, Bassanio, are the names of England's first published woman writer, Amelia Johnson Willoughby Bassanio. She's written her own names into the plays and associated them with the standard Renaissance image for the great poet, as a way of showing us very clearly that she wrote them so that she would eventually be known for what she had done. There's just too many coincidences here. Her family knew Johnson. The publisher was one of her Willoughby cousins, and she was alive and able to make those changes, which Mr. William Shakespeare was not able to do, because he was dead. The Shakespearean plays are the most musical plays in the world. They have altogether nearly 2,000 musical references all throughout, and there are several very large collections of all these terms, which have been turned into special dictionaries of Shakespearean music. In addition, they use about 100 songs, of which the most popular, which is used 4 times, is King Cophetua and the Beggar Maid. Now, this is an unusual song to have as the most popular Shakespearean song, you would think, because it's about a black king of Africa who picks up a young black beggar maid and falls in love with her and marries her. and you can imagine why this might be of interest to a young black woman living with the son of Henry VIII. It's hard to imagine, a better biographical fit for being interested in that song. So these are the most musical plays in the world. Taming of the Shrew, for instance, has 110 different musical references in it, which is about one every minute. And these plays are, in fact, 300% more musical than any plays by any other writer in England, because the average play by Marlowe or Lodge or Green has only 18 references in a play, which compares to like Twelfth Night, which has 91 or 110 in the Shrew. But what is really even more interesting is that the music for several of these plays was composed by Robert Johnson, who was Amelia's maternal cousin. He was a lutist and the son of another royal lutist who was the brother of her mother. So her maternal cousin Robert Johnson wrote Where the Bee Suck, There Suck I, wrote The Tempest, Full Fathom 5, Thy Father Lieth, and he altogether wrote about half a dozen of these songs and dance music for the plays. And of course, because this was Elizabethan London, playwrights would give the work to members of their family and the people that they knew and trusted, and that must be why Robert Johnson ended up being the most popular composer for any of the Shakespearean plays. It's always been a problem trying to understand how the author could have had this very strong feminist slant in Tudor England, because there were very few women who were highly educated. Certainly Mr. Shakespeare's daughters were both illiterate and they were not educated, and the portrait of the women as being associated with music, they were playing music and reading Ovid and speaking foreign languages. This is a portrait of a very select number of women in the country, probably as small as 30 or 40 women in the country would have really matched this sort of profile. And it just happened that one of them was Anne Locke, who was the inventor of the sonnet sequence, who was the daughter of the people who lived next door to Amelia when she was growing up, and a friend of Susan Bertie's, who was her stepmother. So she was one of the top 4 most educated women in the country, and so Amelia had access to her right from the start of her life, while living with the Willoughbys. And then in the household where she was living with the Willoughbys, Catherine, Duchess of Suffolk, was an early Tudor feminist who was the woman who persuaded Henry VIII to allow women to read the Bible for themselves rather than have it read to them by priests, and says so in the her entry in the Dictionary of National Biography. It's well known. So she was very concerned about women being able to read, particularly reading the Bible. She makes sure that her daughter Susan Bertie was educated by Miles Coverdale, one of the translators of the Bible. So Amelia was growing up in a situation where it was expected that women would be highly educated, and she was also growing up at court, where one of the books that were used to train young girls in etiquette at court was the Knight de la Tour Landry's book for his 4 daughters, which had been written really as a guide of etiquette by Landry for his daughters, and was used to teach young girls how to behave at court. And this is used in the Shrew play in several places, and it's really been quite inexplicable why the plays should use a training manual for young girls at court. How on earth would anybody get to know it? Secondly, the Shakespearean plays also use the work of De Pizan, who was a woman lawyer, who was a feminist who believed that women should be able to speak out for themselves and learn law. And her work is used in several places. It's used in Midsummer Night's Dream. It's used in some of the Henry plays, and It's used even in As You Like It, where one of her descriptions of the wind is used. And she's also using aspects of another major woman writer, Queen Margaret of Navarre, who was an early woman playwright of the 1530s. So for some reason, the author of the Shakespearean plays has gone out of their way to make use of women playwrights. Nobody's ever had any reason to explain why Mr. Shakespeare should have started writing Italian marriage comedies in 1592, but it's a perfect match for Amelia's biography, because she was at court from up to 1592, when she was living with Lord Hunsdon, and the people she was writing about, the Tudors, were, you know, essentially the family she was living in. She was living at court. She was living with, you know, Henry VIII's son. I mean, this was not remote stuff. This was like the family that she knew about. And what's more, the Willoughby family was the cadet branch of the Tudors. So both through her adopted Willoughby connections and also through living with Hunsdon for another 10 years, this is like getting on for 20 years of living right in the middle of Tudor history. So writing about Henry VI was not like, oh, let's write a play about sort of ancient English history. It was writing about something that was very immediate, and people were very aware of their ancestors and the formation of the Tudor line and all that stuff. That was everyday life for her. And then, of course, it all changed because she was thrown out of court when she got pregnant at the end of 1592, and that's when she made a marriage to her cousin, Alfonso Lanier, who was himself a French-Italian ancestry. And that is the point when she started writing about Italian marriage comedies. That's the point when she started writing the Shrew play and Romeo and Juliet and Gentleman of Verona and all these 7 Italianish comedies. They were relating very clearly to her own life, and the Shrew play relates very, very clearly to her own life, because if you look at the 2 different versions of the Shrew play, there's the Taming of a Shrew, 1594, and the Taming of the Shrew, 1623 folio. One is a rewriting of the other, and across them you have an Amelia, and you have a Baptista, and you have an Alfonso, and Amelia is her name, and Alfonso is her husband's name, Baptista is her father's name, and you know, and the taming of this woman Kate, who is like a kite, which is a sort of falcon, is very immediate, because Amelia got married to Alfonso Lanier, and Lanier means falcon in French. So here she is describing a little scene of her own life, which must have been very, 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 very difficult. And you know, she's doing it at exactly the right place and the right time, reflecting, you know, the fact that she had moved out of court. I mean, the most interesting links between Salve Deus and the plays are firstly that Salve Deus contains a long crucifixion story. It's 1600-line comic, satiric crucifixion portrait. And this is relevant because the allegories in the plays include several satirical crucifixion stories, including the death of Pyramus. So the existence of this big crucifixion story is important. Secondly, Salve Deus uses the Gospel of Matthew, which is the same Gospel used by the writer of the plays. It uses many of the same sources, like Boccaccio and Ovid, that were also used by the author of the plays. It uses a rare word, dictina, which is a word for the moon goddess in a particular spelling that's only found in 2 places, found in Salve Deus and found in Love's Labour's Lost. It also uses a number of words that were actually invented by the author of the Shakespearean plays, and it also uses rare word clusters. For example, the Cookham poem, which is the end poem of the collection, uses references to birds, ditties and warbling that are used all together, that are only found in the Shakespearean plays and found in this collection of poems by Amelia. it also uses references to how frost affects plants that are only otherwise found in the Shakespearean plays. So there are many different stylistic characteristics that are found. But perhaps the most important of all of them is that in one of the prefatory letters, which is the letter to Mary Sidney, is written in the form very similar to a masque, and it starts with the descent of the chariot of Juno, and it is an adaptation of a masque by Daniel, the Masque of the Goddesses, 12 Goddesses, and it is this masque that was also used by the writer of The Tempest to create the short masque that exists in The Tempest, which also has the descent of a chariot of Juno. So the coincidence that at the same time as the person was writing The Tempest, this other person was also writing a little masque also about the descent of the chariot of Juno, it's just too much to believe that these were not connected. There are three pieces of direct literary evidence that link Amelia to the plays. The first of them is her poem, Salve Deus, Rex Judeorum, 1611. This poem is 3,000 lines long. It appeared under her own name as Amelia, wife of Captain Lanier, and it comprises several different works. It comprises a country house poem at the end on Cookham. It comprises various introductions at the beginning that are addressed to the noble English ladies of England, and it includes a 160-line masque, which is in the form of a letter to Countess Mary Sidney, and a very long satirical crucifixion poem, which is the main poem in the collection, and is Salve Deus. And this satirical poem on the crucifixion is what gives us the clue that it was written by the same person as the Shakespearean plays, because, for example, in Midsummer Night's Dream, in the story of Pyramus and Thisbe, we have a very comic satirical crucifixion story. In As You Like It, in the story of Jane Smile, we have another satirical comic passion story, and in fact the Jewish satire in the plays, which is a comic satirical allegory, is very similar to the sort of allegory, the sort of satire that exists in Amelia's Salve Deus poem of 1611. The second piece of literary evidence is what I like to call the swan signatures. Now, in the Renaissance, there was the idea that the standard image of the great poet was a swan dying to music, and this image comes from Ovid, where it had been used a couple of times, and the idea was that the swan, when it knew it was going to die, would sing a tune, and that this was somehow emblematic of the great poet in the same way it was emblematic of Ovid. And it was used by at least a dozen poets. And in the Shakespearean plays, there are only 3 examples of swans dying to music. One of them is in Merchant of Venice, where it refers to Bassanio dying in Portia's tears. Another of them is in King John, where it refers to Henry, who is John's son. And the third one is in Othello. And the strange thing about the one in Othello is that we have the 1622 quarto of Othello, and it doesn't appear in it. So it was added in to Othello between 1622 and 1623, when the first folio was being written, in the form of 163 extra lines. And these lines expand the part of Amelia, and they also put in a feminist manifesto, and finally they put in the Willow song, Willow, Willow, Willow. So why is this important? Because these 4 names, Amelia, Willow, Johnson, Bassanio, just happen to be the 4 names of this woman, whose names are Amelia, being her first name, Johnson is her mother's name. Willow is the name of the family she was adopted into at the age of 7. And Bassano is her father's name, her family name. And statistically, this is not a coincidence. We can do an analysis on English names, and we know how many there are, and the chances of this being coincidence are just impossible. It's 99.9999999999999% certain that this is not coincidence, that this was created deliberately. So this is the fundamental piece of evidence that shows that Amelia has left behind her literary signatures on the plays to show everybody that she was this great poet who was dying like a swan to music. Now, the Bassano family trademark was a rabbit's foot, and it originally came about because the ghetto in Venice was thought to be the shape of a rabbit's foot, and they used it as the symbol that was on all their musical instruments. And when they became the court musicians to Henry VIII, they sent the king a crate of rabbits. So rabbits were important. And in 1594, somebody wrote a book called Willoughby His Avissa. Avissa meaning avissa, the unseen, and avissa meaning also the female bird, the female avis. So the unseen bird of the Willoughby family. And Amelia was adopted into the Willoughby family at the age of 7. So Willoughby His Avissa is a 3,000-line poem which talks about a woman playwright who is never named, but we are told that her real name resembles Avissa, and she also lives near the theatre district, and this has been long recognised as the first book in the world ever to mention Shakespeare. And it also describes Avissa as a woman playwright who calls great numbers to the field. And at the bottom of the title page, which is an Italianate title page that I've had investigated by the Metropolitan Museum, this definitely comes from Italian models, there are, surprise, surprise, 2 rabbits. And if you look at the sonnets, which were published in 1609, the Shakespearean sonnets, in exactly the same place on the front page, you find a pair of rabbits, just like the ones in Willoughby His Avissa. So this, for me, is evidence that links Willoughby His Avissa as Amelia's poem, it links it to the sonnets, and it links it to the Bassano family. And this, together with the other pieces of literary evidence, I think makes a very strong case that we have here in Willoughby His Avissa Amelia's first early love poems, which in fact talk about having an affair with the Earl of Southampton, and are the first documents in the world ever to refer to Shakespeare.